Right
Well,
now, I wanted to start doing walks and runs and things, and it's just like
yeah,
the heat, the mask,
I know. I keep waiting for like Nike to invent like the perfect mask to exercise in.
the perfect mask.
They
Right?
haven't. They haven't yet. I'm sure they have scientists trying to figure it out. Yeah. So
That is a good one. I'm sure they do.
yeah, yeah. Well, hey, I thought we'd do something a little different. I promised last week we'd do something not such a depressing downer. We've talked about 1968 and assassinations and riots and everything lately, and um, so we're just going to go straight down the middle. We're going to talk about social studies graphics. I made this a while ago, and it's a pretty good. Um, I think it's a pretty good thing. 21 slides, 21 different graphics. I've got questions we can discuss. But if your goal is to head towards the GED or the high set, those tests rely a great deal on graphics, whether it's, kind of the things on the screen. You got maps, you got all kinds of different charts and things. So we're going to look at a bunch of different things, like basically everything I could come up with. Um, and some of them are pretty rudimentary. You know how to read a pie graph and stuff. But I got a couple of interesting things here. But it's just good to practice. So we're just gonna sort of talk our way through them today. Um, so the first kind of map is a population density. Okay, now this is a common thing, population density, or any kind of map where there's like a scale of, it's always colors, right? So it's got to be visualized somehow. But here, obviously, population density, we can look at the key. You always want to look at the title of whatever you're looking at, the graphic. There's got to usually always a title, and then whatever key or legend or the information, the thing that translates what you're looking at. So here you have this color scale. So density, which is person per square kilometer. Obviously, we have a globe divided by nations, and it goes from population density 0 to 550 plus. That's 550 people per square kilometer. Now, a square kilometer is about a quarter of a square mile, because a kilometer is roughly half a mile. So if you square that, it would be a quarter of the area of a square mile. So, um, number one, how can you identify a country with the highest population density? How do we know? We look at this, if I ask a country, how are we going to know what has the highest population density?
Whatever's extra red.
Yeah, the reddest, the darkest, right? Whatever that scale is, it appears red is what we're looking for. Um, so that's by country, and there's red spots. Number two, name a country that has a comparable population density to that of the United States. Okay, how would we know? How would we answer that question?
Um, isn't it just basically what has a similar color to the United States?
Yeah, yeah, which could be tricky on a map like this if these are really all these little color squares at the bottom. It'd be difficult to pinpoint exactly. But yeah, you're just looking for a similar color. Okay. Now, none of these countries are labeled, so it does get tricky. But I mean, looks like Mexico is slightly darker, right? So maybe Mexico has a slightly higher population density. Look at Canada, far less population density. There's some similar ones down here in northern Central America, northern South America, some of the European countries. Well, a lot of countries have a very similar country to the United States. Okay, now number three, this is a tricky question. We all know Australia, okay, down here lower right. What does this graph tell you about the size of Australian cities? Okay, first, does it, from this map, um, does Australia as a country have high or low population density?
No.
Low, because it's like, it looks like it's one of the lightest possible colors. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I wrote this question number three, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what I was thinking, but there are some big cities in Australia, right? You have Sydney, Australia, Melbourne. Um, those are the two big ones. Their capital is Canberra. Is there another? Perth, Australia. Sydney and Melbourne. Sydney, Australia, and Melbourne are the two biggest cities. What conclusion can we draw about Australia from this map? There's big, big cities, world-class giant cities in Australia, a couple of them. What does this tell us about
That
Australia?
that it has a lot of space because it was density per kilometer.
Right, right. So um, it tells us, yeah, there may be cities. Okay, we'll kind of disregard my actual question there, but there are cities in Australia. But if you take the country as a whole, there must be huge amounts of empty space. And in fact, there are huge amounts of empty space, like literal empty space in Australia. Let's actually pop out of here. Let's look at see if I don't even know, but let's see if we can find one. Density of Australia. Okay, let's look for a map. Uh, okay, here's a map of the population density of Australia. The darkest red is 100 or more people per square kilometer. So we're comparing the same thing as the original map, and there's barely any red, right? I think this is over here is on the west is Melbourne, the east is Sydney. I forget exactly which of these is Sydney. So almost everyone in Australia, every human that lives in Australia lives near the coast. Okay, right? Because the vast majority, and there's little specks. Maybe that's a town, that's a little bit of a population, little teeny specks of a little bit of color. But the vast majority of land in Australia is just empty land, 0.1 to 1 person per kilometer. Actually, less. The lightest color is less than 0.1 person per kilometer. So, like pretty much nobody, no big towns anyway. Okay, so the vast majority of people that live in Australia live in very small places near the coast. They may be very dense, but when you compare that to the overall area of land, it doesn't amount to much because then, uh, when we go back to this map, it's almost pretty much the lightest possible color, right? So maybe my question number three isn't a good one, but we can draw a conclusion that whatever cities there are aren't big enough to offset the land size of Australia. So a map like this can tell you a lot, but you also have to realize the limitations of what you're looking at, right? This map is divided by country. America also, not nearly as much as Australia, but America has big cities, largely near the coasts, and then the middle of the country, just like the middle of Pennsylvania. Not a lot of big cities compared to Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. So just like America, there's not quite as much empty space, but kind of similar to Australia. So you got to think, what am I looking at? What is this telling me, and what can this not tell me? Okay, here's the next one. Oh, Nadia, I saw you logged in, logged out and logged in. Able to connect
Yeah, I
okay?
was kicked out. Good morning.
Okay. Yeah, good morning. Thanks for jumping back in.
Yeah.
Okay, so this kind of graphic is called a scatter plot. Just because the information's scattered, but with a little bit of work you can learn from it, right? Generally a scatter plot, you see this line, this diagonal line, that would be like considered the average of whatever this is telling us. Okay, so this is gun ownership versus gun deaths by state. So gun deaths is the y-axis, the vertical axis, number of deaths per 100,000 people, 4, 8, 12, 16 per 100,000 people. And across the bottom is gun ownership as a percentage of households. So 30% of households, 40%, 50%, and this is by state. You see all the state names, okay? So the question is, generally, people are gonna make this, make a scatter plot like this, make a graph to show a relationship or to determine if there is a relationship. And so you can see there is, imagine this without the diagonal line. There is a trend going from the bottom left to the upper right. So as gun ownership goes up, gun deaths go up. It makes sense. More people have guns, more people are going to die by guns, either violently or accidentally. Right? So you can learn a relationship. That's why you would make a graph like this. See, is there a relationship? Right? So number 4, what state has the lowest rate of gun deaths per 100,000 people?
Okay, shot in the dark, but I would say Hawaii.
No, close.
Okay, that's a close. I'm not sure how to read this.
Okay, so we're only looking at one. We're not looking at so the question is, what state has the lowest rate of gun deaths? So we're only looking at the vertical. So the lowest would
right.
be the lowest top to bottom. And Massachusetts
Oh,
is
Massachusetts?
a little bit lower, right? It's a little bit
Okay,
lower than Hawaii. Now, it's further to the right, but we're not worried about that part. We're asking about the gun deaths. So which is the absolute lowest on the top to bottom vertical axes? It's Massachusetts. They have the fewest
gotcha.
gun deaths per 100,000 people. Okay.
Okay.
What state has the highest rate of gun ownership? So that is the left to right horizontal axis. What state has the highest rate of gun ownership?
Wyoming.
Wyoming, right. And it doesn't matter that it's high, we're only looking farthest to the right, and it looks like if you draw a line down, Wyoming is just slightly the longest. Okay, now it is also, if we might call it a tie, Wyoming with Louisiana.
Louisiana.
So somebody who maybe is in support of gun control could look at Wyoming and say, look, they have the highest rate of gun ownership by a percentage of households, 60, what's that, maybe 62, 63% of households in Wyoming have guns. And look, they have the highest, or maybe tied, for the highest rate of gun deaths per 100,000 people. Now, there's a lot, you could argue against that, but that's a fact that you could point to. Okay. Describe Pennsylvania's position on this graph. Let's see, where is Pennsylvania? Oh, I see Pennsylvania.
It's right in the middle next to Virginia and
Yeah.
Texas. Yeah.
So where would we be in relation to the other states? How would you describe that position?
A little less than 50%. Well, actually, according to the thing, it's a lot less than 50%. But
Yeah, maybe 50% less than, or less than 50% of other states. We seem to be,
yeah,
well, let's take one thing at a time. So left to right, there seem to be, I'd say, more states to the right on gun ownership, right? I mean, just kind of looking at
Right.
it. I would say there's more states to the right on gun ownership. So we're in the lower half of gun ownership. Now, top to bottom, are there more states above us or below us? I don't know. That'd be hard to.
I think, mm, well, that's hard to. No, I think there's more states below us actually. It's just that
Yeah,
they're more scattered out.
yeah, maybe. So that's, a little less conclusive. So you could see, um, you can make comparisons. And if you were like a governor in a state, or if you were trying to make, keep people safe from some people, are for or against gun ownership. I don't think anybody's for gun deaths. So if you were trying to, solve the problem, you could look at, uh, Louisiana and say, well, they have very high gun deaths, but not not as many gun owners as, say, Wyoming. So you could say, well, Louisiana must be less safe than Wyoming. Or you could look at South Dakota. Say South Dakota has a lot of gun owners, 60% of households, but fewer gun deaths than, say, Wyoming. So South Dakota must be doing something right if they have a lot of gun ownership, but fewer deaths. So you could then you could go to South Dakota and study that culture or their laws or something, and say, okay, why are they have a lot of guns, but fewer gun deaths than other places? So what are they doing right? So that's a scatter plot. Okay. All right, a line graph also. You gotta think, what is this telling me? What is this not telling me? And here's a case where, a little bit of a trick question on here. Okay. So the title is Rate of Firearm Suicides After Australia's gun buyback program. And you've seen this in America sometimes, different states or cities. I think big cities like New York have had gun buyback programs. The government will buy your gun from you, right? Because they're not going to just take your gun. But we've done this with automatic weapons. I think maybe under Bill Clinton, they did a gun buyback program. We want fewer automatic weapons on the streets. So instead of passing a law and then making it illegal, and people get upset and say the government's taking my guns, they offer to pay you. The government will buy your gun from you. That way you get some money and the government gets what it wants, which is fewer guns out there on the streets, right? Especially like big semi-automatic weapons and stuff. So it's happened before. Australia did it. Okay, it looks like they did it in 1996 and it continued to 2006. So that's the gray period. So this would show up on a website or some news article studying the effect of the buyback program from 1996 to 2006. The red line, or the vertical axis, is firearm suicides per 100,000 residents. And the number goes up and down and up and down as we go through time across the bottom. Okay. So, number 7, what would supporters of Australia's gun buyback program say was its effect? It starts in 96. If you supported that gun buyback program, what would you say? What was its effect?
That the suicide rates went down.
Yes, so they started in 1996, getting guns off the streets, buying back guns from people, and suicide rates go down. Okay, sounds good, looks good, I agree. Number 8, what could opponents of the program point to say that it was not necessarily effective?
That the suicide rates were already decreasing by that
Exactly,
time.
yeah, very good. So they could say, hey, starting in mid 80s, the suicide rate dropped. and dropped and dropped and dropped and was already way down in 1996. So that trend just continued. And if you were an opponent of the buyback program, you could say it had no effect. The suicide rate was already, and you can't deny, it was already going down. So that's kind of a trick question. You could, when you're looking at something like this, you got to look at the whole thing. They did the gray area to focus your attention on the gun buyback program and the time that it was in effect. But you got to think, okay, yeah, yes, number 7, the suicide rate went down, definitely. But you got to look at the whole picture, right? If this graph was just that gray area, you might say, oh, that absolutely, the program was a success. But when they expand the picture to include the 90s and 80s and 70s, and you can see that the overall trend was already there, then, it's a different story. It's a different argument. So, look at the whole information. Okay, here's another scatter plot by nations. Okay, we've got gun-related deaths per 100,000 people, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And across the bottom, guns per one. Now this is a little bit different. This isn't gun ownership by percentage of households. This is guns per 100 people, 40, 60. So this isn't every country in the world, but it's a lot. Number 9, the United States is an outlier on this graph. Here's the United States in the upper right. It's an outlier. It's not clustered in with the others, right? It's not part of any trend. How would you describe the position of the United States on this graph? What does this tell you about the United States?
That it leads in both the numbers of gun deaths and gun ownerships by a large majority.
By a lot on both axes, right? It has way more gun deaths than anybody else and way more guns than anybody else. Number 10, Argentina is also an outlier among the nations shown on this graph. Here's Argentina. In what way? What would you say? What does this tell us about Argentina?
I would say they have more gun deaths than guns.
Yeah, they don't have many guns. If you go left to right, guns per 100 people, Argentina's right in the mix. Actually, they're on the lower side compared to all their friends. But gun deaths, they're way up there, second in the world here. So something's going on in Argentina. There are not that many guns, but there's a lot of gun deaths. So, you could draw some conclusions there. Switzerland, you could look at Switzerland. Has a lot of guns, maybe around 50 guns per 100 people. But they keep their gun deaths down. Okay, describe Japan's position. Oops. Japan's down near the bottom. Very bottom.
All the way to the bottom.
It's almost like no guns at all, which results in no gun deaths.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, there are countries. I mean, it was written into our Constitution in the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and that has a history in America. There's other countries that, that they don't recognize gun ownership, the right to bear arms. Most other countries don't recognize that as a human right. And so nobody has a gun. And so nobody dies of gun-related accidents or deaths or violence. So, you can learn. And again, we have the diagonal here. And is that diagonal made scientifically? Is that actually the average, and they average it out and they go up? You could, okay, so let's look at this diagonal for a second. If you are, so that's the average for as the number of guns go up, the number of gun deaths go up. So if you are to the, if you are below, if you are to the right or below that diagonal, what does that tell us? Is it good? Okay, let me say this, and this, you know, I don't even know, so we'll have to figure this out. Is it better to be to the above the diagonal line or below it? Above would be Barbados, Argentina, is that Canada, Finland, Croatia. Below it is Cyprus, Germany, Qatar, Japan, Chile. Which would be a
I think
better
it would be below it.
below it? What would it tell you if you were below it?
Guns per 100 people. How many people? It looks like they don't have many people that have guns.
Well, not necessarily. So let's look at this kind of vertical group here. We have Canada, Finland, France, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Germany. See this kind of vertical line here? Okay.
Yeah.
They all have about the same number of guns per 100 people. Now this keeps popping up on my screen, but let's say 30, 35%, 30%, let's say 30%, or 30 guns per 100 people. They all have about that, this vertical line. But Germany has far fewer, maybe, you know, if we take that over, Germany has maybe 1 death per 100,000 people. Finland, France is right on the line at maybe, well, let's call that 3. Finland is above that. Canada is above that at maybe 4 to 5. So if you are below the line, that means you're doing better than average. If all of these, if this is a group that has 30 guns per 100 people, if they all have the same number of guns in their country, let's say, but Germany has fewer deaths. They're lower. They're vertically lower. So if you're below the line, that means you're doing better than average. You have fewer deaths than average. France being the average here because they're right on the line. If you're above the line, that means for the number of guns in your country, you have more deaths than average. So something like this, where they put that average diagonal line in, if there's a, you know, depending on what you're discussing, there's a good side of the line to be on, and it would be the lower side, you know, that triangle. So you could, you know, assuming it's something like gun deaths, which is something that you know, people are going to be against, you can decide, you know, you can make judgment calls like that on this kind of thing. So scatter plots are interesting. You can see trends. You can see, okay, where is the United States? We are unfortunately on the upper, you know, not only are we a crazy outlier with like 90 guns per 100 people, but we also have way more deaths, and we are above, if that diagonal line is the average, we are above the average on deaths for the amount of guns that we have. So, you know, that's not a good thing. Okay, let's look at population pyramids. This isn't something that's very common, but I think they're pretty interesting. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple. Has anybody seen a population pyramid before?
No, I have, I think, but not sure.
No, I have not seen it.
Yeah, they're pretty neat. So let's take a minute to take it in. Okay, so we have, this is a country. This is the United States of America. We're going to look at a couple different ones. It's a population in the year 2016. Current total population at that time was 324 million people. Now, there's a lot going on here, so you can learn a lot. The vertical axis is age. Okay, we have 10 to 14, 15 to 19, 20 to 24. So it looks like 5-year increments of age going up to 100 years old. Across the bottom, we have percentage of the population. But if you look at it, 0 isn't in the corner, 0 is in the middle. So there's actually like 2 graphs here, right? 0 is in the center, and then you have going out both to the left and the right. You have 2%, 2%, 4%, 4%. So that's kind of different than we normally see. But you have male in blue, female in pink. So this is a visual depiction of how many men and women in given 5-year age groups make up the country's total population, right? There's a lot going on, but you can learn. So what happens around age 60?
It starts to decrease.
It decreases, right? From 3%, 2%, 1%. And by the time you get to 95 to 99, the men are rounded to 0.0. Now there are 95-year-old men, but I mean, they round down here to 0. And women 0.1% of the overall total population in America. Okay. So number 12, what percentage of America's population is men aged 20 to 24?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, number 12, what percentage of America's population is men aged 20 to 24?
3.7.
3.7, right? So if you lined up 100 people, 100 Americans, or let's say 100,000 Americans, you'd have, on average, you would have 3.7% of them would be men aged 20 to 24. What percentage, now number 13, you can estimate, you can round, what percentage of America's population is in their 40s? I just gathered up 100 Americans. How many of them would be in their 40s?
How many men? 3.1.
Well, in their 40s, which would be 40, it'd be two slices, 40 to 44 and 45 to 49.
3.2, 3. Actually the same, 3.2.
Yeah, so here we can look at men and women, right? So 40 to 44, men and women are both actually 3.2, and 45 to 49, we have 3.2% and 3.1%. But we don't need to add those 4 numbers because we're talking about percentage of the total population. So really we'd want like an average between the men and women, but they're so close that we can just kind of just give them the same number. So if there's this, roughly, let's say, the same number of men and women in their 40s, the numbers are so close, then we just want to add the 2 slices that are in the 40s. So 3.2 and 3.2 would be 6.4%, right? So if we gathered up 100 Americans, 6.4% of them would be in their 40s, age 40 to 49. Okay, number 14, what is the largest section of the population in this graph?
20 to 24 for male and female, I think.
Yeah, men age 20 to 24 is 3.7%. Women, there's a couple of 3.5s, but one of which is the 20 to 24. So yeah, the 20 to 24 age group is a pretty big one. Now, there's not a lot of deviation, right? Now, let's look at Kenya. Okay, here's Kenya. In East Africa, right? Different than the United States, population 47 million to our, what were we, 324 million. Okay, so Kenya. Number 15, how would you describe the population of Kenya compared to the United States?
It doesn't have longevity as far as if with the United States graph, it looks like the population lasts a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And people don't live a long life there.
Yeah, that is what, those are two good conclusions. Because what this is, all this is a cross section of society. How many people, if you're walking down the street in Kenya, this is how many people of each age and gender you're going to walk past, right? Doesn't tell us anything else, but you can make a lot of conclusions. So number 16, what would the crowd look like if you walk down the street in Kenya? I guess I was thinking about streets when I wrote this. What would the crowd look like? Most of the people you would see would be what?
Kids and youth.
Yeah, kids, young, right? Population is very young. If you're looking for a 60-year-old, you're going to have a tough time. If you're looking for an 80-year-old in Kenya, you're going to have a tough time finding them. Okay, so number 17. Now, if we were sociologists or, people working in global economics or trying to improve societies around the world. Number 17, what might this mean for Kenyan society?
That care so that as people do age, they can live a longer and healthier life.
Yeah, maybe there's some health things that need to be figured out, right? Now we don't, there's very, very limited information that this gives us, but you could use something like this, and then you could use it over time. Let's look at this 10 years from now. Let's make a change. Let's, get cleaner water or, make some societal change, and then look at this 10 years from now. Okay. Now, it'd be interesting. I've got one more that's really cool. But thinking back to the United States, the baby boom generation, the baby boomers, were people born from, I think, 1948 to 1964. Anybody born in that time is called the baby boomers, because men came back from World War II and there was a baby boom. People started having families after World War II. It wasn't humongous, but it was a noticeable change. Well, baby boomers now are, I don't know, 70 to 85. Well, no, 55. I don't even know. Those people born then are, well, they're in their 70s. Okay, the baby boomer generation is in their 70s. You could watch, if we had like a time lapse of this population pyramid, you could watch those baby boomers age, if it was a really wide, abnormally wide group, you could watch it climb up the pyramid. And so you can see over time, if you had this if you did one of these every 5 years or something, you could see groups get bigger or smaller. Okay, here's a crazy one. Qatar in the Middle East. It says Qatar is an oil-rich nation and the wealthiest nation in the world. Per capita, it's the wealthiest nation, with well over twice the wealth per capita than the United States. So the average person in Qatar is has twice the wealth than the United States, and I'd say the United States is doing pretty good. Judging from the graph, what can you tell about Qatari society?
There are more men than women.
Yeah, there's a ton.
Especially
Yeah.
at age between 25 and 35.
Yeah.
So probably if they could decide whom to have, girl and boy, so they left boys. I think so.
You have that. Okay. Now, I don't know if that's at play in Qatar.
If abortion were legal there, and if they did not want to have big family, so probably they made their choice for boys, for having boys.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good conclusion. The population for men in their mid 20s to mid 30s is literally off this graph. Like it bursts past the 10%. So, I don't even know what that would be. 10, 12%.
And I don't know how they figure out about when men decided to get married, they don't have enough of girls.
That's true. So we could make some conclusions. We could make some assumptions about what it's like for those young men. I mean, people in their 20s and 30s, they like to date, they like to get married. And so there's so many more 20-year-old, 25-year-old men than 25-year-old women. So we could, be interesting to know more about that. Now, let me tell you, Qatar, especially the last 10 years or so, is huge on immigration. Most people in Qatar were not born in Qatar. So this isn't.
And where is this country? I'm sorry, where this country is located?
It's in the Middle East. Let's look it up here. It's in the Middle East. Let's find. Okay, that's where it is. It's a little country that sticks out from the Saudi Arabian Peninsula by Saudi Arabia. It's an oil-rich country. Okay, here's this. Let me see where we are. Here's the satellite image. It's all desert. Okay, you have Doha. These are just all Arabic.
So probably in that country, it's more popular to be a man than woman. I don't know how women's life look like there, but it looks like woman doesn't want to move to that country.
Right. Okay. So we can, if we add in the information that the population of Qatar is heavily, heavily immigrants, we can rule out, Nadia, your idea that, well, maybe it's abortion and they abort female babies. Okay, good idea, good conclusion. But we can say that's probably not the case. That's probably not the reason why this looks this way. What we can say then is if so many, I don't know exactly how many, but I'm pretty sure the majority of people that live in Qatar weren't born there. They're immigrants. People are coming in to work, to make money. Okay. Their wealth per capita, per person, is twice that of the United States. It's the richest country in the world. People are moving there to become millionaires. In oil or travel, the travel industry or technology. And most of those people moving in look to me to be men, not women. But even on the women's side, look at, the 25, 30, 35 women. Those are young working age people. And the teenagers underneath them aren't that many. So I would say the average person living in Qatar I'm going to make a broad conclusion here. The average person that you pass on the street in Qatar moved there is of a young 20s or 30s age, working age, and moved there. And for some reason, into industries that value young people, because there's not that many 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds. It's a young person's, a young man's country in Qatar. So it'd
And
be
another
interesting.
conclusion, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
another conclusion I can make, that they don't like to have big families. Like in Kenya,
Yeah.
probably they have really big families with 5, 10 kids, but here probably just 1 or 2 kids.
That would be an interesting thing to learn. There's tons of young people. If you're in your 20s and 30s, you can have babies, but it doesn't appear that they're doing a lot of that. Yeah, so there's all kinds of interesting questions you could explore out of this kind of thing. But yeah, Qatar is a really interesting one. When I was making this, I looked at if you look, actually, let's take a minute. Where did I find that? There was a website. Was it this one? Oh yeah, this is right. Populationpyramid.net. And you can.
Here's the thing. Brought me back. Well, Ramsey was the one who brought me back the Chanel thing because I really wanted something from Saudi Arabia. He's like, "What the fuck you want from over here?
Yeah.
It's the same thing."
Yeah. Yes. So you can see populationpyramid.net. You can actually go by continent, Asia. If we go by the Middle Eastern, here's Bahrain, also in the Middle East. Same thing. Lots of young men. Let me see. Bhutan, that's in Asia. Okay, fewer. Well, let's see. Let's see, China. China is a very older population, fewer children. So then you wonder what happened maybe 25 years ago that they started having fewer children, because you think 25, you look at the 25-year-olds, something happens around 25, 30 years ago where people start having less children, because since then there have been the numbers are smaller. So again, you can look back and think, what is the reason for that? Ethiopia and Kenya, okay, that's next door to Kenya, looks very similar to Kenya. So there's all kinds of populationpyramid.net. I think it's pretty neat. Uruguay, South America, okay, Ukraine. There's Ukraine, okay. So Nadia, so here's Ukraine. It looks like a good, whereas we've seen other countries where the population, maybe life expectancy declines pretty rapidly. Here, especially on the women's side, you can be pretty healthy there's a lot of 60, 70-year-old women, more than men. I wonder why, why there might be more women than men, but there's actually some fluctuations here.
I'll let you know why, because man is drinking alcohol there.
Yeah. Oh, is there more?
They're just dying.
Is that does that seem true to you, that there would be more older women? Huh.
I know that women live healthier life.
Okay. Well, here it is. Yeah, here's the proof, right? So there you go. So you can see something like that if you were a sociologist or somebody who's trying to help people lead a healthy life, or maybe see trends across the globe. If it's common knowledge in Ukraine that women live healthier lives than men, and men drink, and it seems people might say, oh, well, I know more older women than men. Well, here it is. Here's the proof, right? There's more pink on this graph than blue. But there's also fewer kids. It seems like there's fewer kids now than there were 30 years ago. So sometimes you can see, I don't have an example ready, but you could see like population over time. If there's a big war, that's going to affect the population. Let's actually look. Let me see if I can find Russia, because Russia took a huge hit in World War II. So let's see if that's reflected.
Actually, Ukraine and Russia, they were hit the same. It was Soviet Union.
Yeah. Well, here's the Russian Federation. So what would World War II? World War II was 40s, so 60 would be 80 years ago. Well, okay, so you're not gonna. That population would be. I mean, World War II vets are now 100 years old. So actually, it may be too late to learn that, right? So it's too much time has passed that we can have good information about that group in the population, that generation, because they're too old. I mean, of course, there's no 100-year-old people left, or so few. But 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 80 years ago, it'd be interesting to see what this looked like. Did World War II take a big chunk out of the pyramid, and would it have been on the men's side and not the women's side? So what would this Russian population pyramid have looked like, say, 5 years after World War II? That'd be really interesting to see. So, okay. Let me see. So that's it for population pyramids. Let's talk about these political cartoons real quick. So you do see political cartoons on the GED and the high set tests. They're tricky, but normally they're general enough that you can make sense of them, right? The number one thing you want to know in the United States for political cartoons is question number 19. What do the donkey and the elephant represent?
The Republican and Democrat.
Right. So the Democratic Party, political party, is represented by the donkey. Republicans are the elephant. There's historical reasons why that is, and it's like 100 years old. But anyway, the donkey is the Democrat, the elephant is the Republican. So anytime you see them, they're representing something. So political cartoons are all about representing things. This isn't a cartoon about a donkey and an elephant. It's a cartoon about the two political parties. So number 20, what is this? Look at the whole thing. What is the meaning of this cartoon?
This looks like it was like for Katrina or Puerto Rico.
Yeah. And question number 20, when might this have been published? After something like Hurricane Katrina or the hurricanes in Puerto Rico a few years. So what does this mean? They're filling up a bag, sandbag says disaster aid, and the donkey is saying one thing we can agree on, right? And it's storming, and there's sandbags, and there's a flood. So disaster aid. So what does this political cartoon mean to us?
It looks like somebody shelling like a lot of money into like what they're saying is for disaster aid, like woe me. I just forgot which side is which for the political parties.
Well, they're working together, right? So it's the donkey is the Democrats, but what they're saying, and he says one thing we can agree on. Now, whenever this was from, I don't know. I didn't even write down when it was from, but if it was from after, I bet you it was from like after Katrina or the Puerto Rican hurricanes 2 years ago. There's a lot that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party don't agree on. They don't accomplish. But after a big disaster, it is one thing that they do agree on. They can get that done. They are more than happy to give that money, millions and billions of dollars to, Louisiana for Hurricane Katrina or to Puerto Rico and give help. The political parties agree on that and work together. So that's it's a little bit of a cynicism that this is the only thing that they can really ever work together on. But it's a good, it's a little, maybe it's a flip side, a little bit of hope that they are willing to step up and work together and cooperate. So I'm sure this did run after a specific disaster. And it was probably in the newspaper also that day that they were working to pass money on to needy communities. Okay, so that's one political cartoon. I do have, maybe we'll continue this next week. We're only halfway through my slides here. But it's interesting. You can always learn a lot. But as we've seen with political cartoons, with population pyramids, with graphs, scatter plots, maps, you always want to read the title and try to garner as much information as you can from what they give you. And then also think, when you're asked a question, does this actually tell me that? Can I know that from this? Because according to this map, you'd think nobody lives in Australia, but that's not exactly true. There's plenty of people. They just live in very small, dense areas. So think, what is this telling me? What can I not necessarily say? So we'll pick up there next week. I think that'll be good. And then somebody asked me, Nadia or whoever asked me last week about the summer. So we had a meeting. I don't know about the other classes. I know somebody's doing a bunch of math and there's a science class every week. I don't know about them, but for me and this social studies class, we're going to do 2 more in June. And then after that, I'm going to take the summer off and pick up probably around when school starts, maybe in August or September. Okay. But I'll send out some emails, and there's always the link to all the YouTube videos and stuff. But that's the plan. So after today, we'll do 2 more meetings. Next week we'll finish this social studies graphics. We'll do 2 more meetings, and then I think take the summer off, it looks like. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions about anything today?
No, I have to review it one more time. And it was really interesting. Thank you.
Good. Well, I'll send out this document, and it'll actually have the rest of the things that we'll discuss next week, so you can check those out ahead of time if you want to. But yeah, thanks for logging in. I hope everybody has a really good day.
Yeah, you do the same. Thank you.
All right.
Have a great week. Bye.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.